Hey, ladies and gents, you may have noticed that last week we didn't have an RPG update, but this week I'm going to rectify that. So last week, the team and I had a big, long planning session about everything GameDev.tv because Rick was over from Australia and visiting us in person. So that's why there was no update last week, just to fill you in. Now this week, I've mostly been doing thinking work, so what I'm going to be taking you through is not actually my own prototype, but I'm going to show you an example project from Unity that I've been using to pick basically their brains and find some best practices. So let's dive in and have a look at that. So what we've got here on the screen is an example project from Unity called, I believe, let me see if I can find it. I need to bring up the Unity Hub. And I've got it in the Unity Hub. You can go and get it from Learn and then Tutorial Projects. So what we've got here is there's the 3D game kit and 2D game kit. I'm using the 2D game kit because I knew it had the components in. The 3D game kit would probably have some useful stuff in as well. So you might want to just generally have a look at any of these tutorial projects. Now what I do, is I don't actually go in and take any of the tutorials. What I do is I download the project and I play around and go, that's a really cool feature. I wonder how they're implementing that, and search through the code base. So let me just give you a taste, a flavor for what this project actually is. If I go ahead and play it. So go ahead and play. Here I am. It's a little 2D side scroller. There's text, which isn't showing up very well at the moment, probably because of the scale. Let me change the scale. There you go. So I'm getting text, and it's a little platformer. You jump around, you can jump through stuff, and then you transition to new levels and so on and so forth. So there's a few interesting things here. One thing that I liked was that the health, for example, has to go between scenes. And in fact, quite a few things like their inventory and so on and so forth, all of that needs to go between scenes. So how were they doing that? That was the big question I had. And interestingly enough, they have an architecture that is very much the same as the architecture I came up with for saving. If you want to see more about how I did saving, you can go and have a look at the videos on YouTube in this playlist, but a little bit earlier, about the save system. Now, okay, so we've got this persistent data manager is the core of it. It's a singleton class, and there's all the gumph going on around being a singleton. If you don't know what a singleton is, you can go and look that up, but basically it means that there's only one instance of this class ever. Okay, so it's a singleton, but the interesting thing is, let's go and find, there's an interesting method where they do load all data and save all data, which then calls load all internal and so on. So they go through all the data persisters. Now, what happens here in my system is slightly different, but not very, is that we do a for loop over all savables, and we get the savables by a component type. They have it the other way around, so that the components that want to save register themselves with the data persistent manager. That's why they've got these data persisters. Then they can go and save each individual one. So if they go and have a look at how it's saved, basically the crux of it is this. There is a dictionary, a hash. It's called a hash in C#, I believe. The hash is getting the data tag from the particular data persister and saving the data against it. So this looks very much like the iSavable interface I created, where basically the savable captures the state into a dictionary. They've done it slightly differently. They capture it into a class, but it's more or less the same thing. The idea is that you go through all the savable objects in the scene and you ask them to tell you their core data, and then you stick that in a dictionary. That's exactly the same thing. Now the difference is I go on to save that dictionary to the file system. They don't. They keep that dictionary in memory so that when you load the new scene, they can then populate that data into the game objects in the new scene. So that's a slight difference. But I think we could definitely have some kind of cascade where we say this needs to be saved to the disk, this doesn't need to be saved to the disk, and so on. Or maybe both. So when you change scenes, you save everything to the disk, but also you don't have to load it from the disk when you load in the new level, which would take more time and slow down level loading. So that's something I learnt from this project quite concretely. That's quite cool. And you can see just an example of something that is a data persister. Their data persister has two main methods, the save data and load data method, whereas we have on our iSaveable capture state and restore state, very much the same thing. It also has this get data settings. The data settings basically tells them whether it's a read-only, write-only, read-write object. That's all about whether you should load or not load, etc. And also it tells us the data tag. Now, I didn't have this against the individual components. So their data tag is against every individual iSaveable, which for me is a component. I have it so that it's against this save load entity, which is a component in itself. So each game object gets its own unique ID. They have it so that each individual component gets its own unique ID, which I think may or may not be a better option. I'm going to see it out through our RPG and see whether I want to switch to that or not. But now I know that's an option. So let's see how it's implemented. Fairly straightforwardly, I've got an inventory item here, and the inventory item persists itself and basically, yeah, implements save data and puts stuff into save data, etc. It's fairly straightforward. I'm not going to go into too much detail with that. You can have a look for yourself if you're interested. The point I'm trying to make is that you can teach yourself a lot of stuff by downloading example projects and exploring and having the courage to read their code base. I know it looks scary at first, but take it one line at a time and try and figure out what's the intention, what are they trying to do. These projects are actually quite well coded. They're not too scary. And if you come up against anything that you don't know, then try and Google for it, and it's a great way to enhance your knowledge. Okay, so I just wanted to show you a couple of other cool things that aren't necessarily going to make it into the RPG, but that I found very interesting, very relevant. First of all, if we go ahead and play, then one thing I found is how they do their pause menu. There's no pause menu stuff in the hierarchy at the moment, but if I go ahead and hit escape and we scroll down now, you can see that there's this UI menus scene that has been loaded, and that's called additive scene loading. If you don't know what that is, again, that's something you can look up, but an additive scene loading basically loads the scene in addition to the currently loaded scene. It doesn't remove the current scene like normal loading does. And this just basically means that the UI menu can be completely separate to the level, can be shared between many levels without having to have a big massive prefab, because at the moment there aren't nested prefabs. They're coming, but they're not there yet. So what they've done instead of having a nested prefab is they've got two levels of prefab by having a scene at the top and then prefabs underneath, so that perhaps each element of this options menu, the pause canvas, the options canvas, control canvas, etc., these different elements have all can be prefabbed separately now, rather than having to be part of a big prefab with all the options canvas stuff. So that's a cool little tidbit I found. And one other cool thing that I found is they've got a little game object for doing transitions between scenes. It's called, I think it's this one, transition to start to zone 2 is the game object, and they've got this script which is a transition point script. But the really interesting thing was this new scene name is actually a drop down. So they've got a drop down of all the available scenes in their Unity project, and they've done this. If I go ahead and look at their project and find where do they have the transition point. So this is how I generally navigate a project, is I just do a find in file. I saw that, you know, there's some transition, there's a keyword I'm interested in. I can go and look for the search results. And let's see, there's lots of transition stuff. Maybe I need to call it something more specific, or maybe I just need to open it by clicking on the script. No, that's not it. Let's look for transition point. Like so. Okay, this is more useful. There you go, got a transition point CS. And what they've got is right here, the new scene name, this one here, this item property that has been exposed, is just a string. But they have decorated the string with a scene name attribute, and they have created a custom attribute drawer that displays all of the currently active scenes into this drop down. I thought that's really cool, and if you ever want to implement that kind of thing, do come and have a look at this project and have a look. So how did I find that? You can follow the scene name, takes you to actually, it's a definition of a property attribute, something that inherits property attribute. You can look up property attributes, and it's a scene name attribute. If I search for scene name attribute, then that's where I found that there's a custom property drawer. It's here in the editor folder, scene name drawer, and you can tell it's a drawer because it's got this annotation, the custom property drawer of the type scene name attribute, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, in here, it gives you all the code for how that's created. And it's a little bit complicated, but again, take it line by line, Googling and looking in the Unity documentation, you can actually probably work out what's going on in here. And if nothing else, you could probably just include the script into your own project if you want that kind of behavior. So I found that project really useful. I don't know about you. Hopefully you're going to go and download, have a poke around and see what you can learn from it, because I think it's very, very useful to use other people's code to help you learn. So hopefully that was a useful video to you. Let me know how you feel about it in the comments below, and whether you have learned anything interesting from this project. If you go ahead and download it yourself, let me know what you find that is really cool, and I'll see you there. Oh, and don't forget to thumbs up or thumbs down if you like the video, and subscribe if you want to be the first to see more of them.